He came in quietly. A worn green jacket. A folded invitation. Just a father hoping to watch his son graduate. But within minutes, two guards asked him to leave right in front of everyone. What no one knew was that this silent man had once commanded warriors. And today, 6 of them were already on their way. The parking lot outside Waverly High School buzzed with excitement. Balloons danced in the breeze, banners fluttered over the main entrance, and families flooded the courtyard in their Sunday best mothers, holding bouquets, fathers adjusting ties, grandparents wiping tears from weathered cheeks. Among the crowd, a man stepped out of a dusty, faded blue pickup truck. He was lean tall, mid-40s maybe. His long, dark hair brushed just above his collar, and the green military jacket he wore was worn soft at the seams, the kind only time and memory could stitch together. Ben Walker didn't smile much, not because he wasn't proud, but because pride for him wasn't loud. It was quiet, deep, rooted. He looked down at the small envelope in his hand. Graduation ticket. Tyler Walker, reserved family seating. He slipped it into his jacket and began walking toward the entrance booths, echoing softly against the pavement. Inside, a sea of families had already taken their seats. Polished shoes clicked across the gymnasium floor. Camera phones flashed. A jazz ensemble of students fumbled through pomp and circumstance as teachers ushered people into orderly rows. Ben found his section, row F, seat 12, clearly marked with his son's name, Tyler Walker. Family. A lump rose in his throat. He hadn't missed a single moment of Tyler's life. Not the scraped knees, not the spelling bees, not the quiet nights helping with math homework when he didn't even understand it himself. Today wasn't just a graduation. It was a culmination of everything they'd survived together. He sat down slowly. A woman in pearls 2 seats over glanced at him, then looked again longer this time. Her lips tightened. Her husband leaned in, whispered something. The man's brow furrowed as he looked Ben up and down. Ben pretended not to notice, but he could feel it. The jacket. It always started with the jacket. Frayed elbows. Faded name patch. A subtle seal insignia near the left cuff, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant to be. But in rooms like this, surrounded by polished nails and designer suits, it stood out like a scar. Ben folded his hands in his lap. He was used to it. But today, he wished for his son's sake that he didn't have to be. The murmurs came next. A man behind him coughed deliberately. A teenager smirked. Then came the not-so-quiet whisper from a row ahead. "Who let that guy in here?" Ben didn't flinch. A tap landed on his shoulder. "Sir," came a voice, low but firm. Ben turned. 2 men stood behind him in security uniforms. One young and tentative, the other older, with shoulders too stiff and a badge that gleamed too proudly. "You're in the wrong section," the older one said. Ben blinked. "No, I'm not. This area's for family. I am family." Ben replied, reaching into his jacket and calmly pulling out the envelope. "My son is graduating, Tyler Walker." The younger guard took the envelope, looked at it, then nodded. "Yeah, he's on the list." The older one frowned. "Even so. You might be more comfortable in the overflow area. It's less, crowded there." Ben paused. He looked at the crowd, at the woman in pearls, at the principal standing on the stage giving rehearsed smiles, at the cameras and the cell phones, and the kids rehearsing their speeches. Then he looked at his ticket and said nothing. After a long breath, Ben stood up. "Fine," he said quietly. He moved without drama, no complaint, no raised voice. But each step he took toward the back felt heavier than the last. As he settled into a row near the rear of the gym behind a column that blocked half the stage, his eyes searched for his son among the sea of caps and gowns. He spotted him third row from the front second seat in. Tyler sat tall, his posture straight, his face serious in the way only 18-year-olds trying to look grown up could manage. And then Tyler turned. Just slightly. His gaze swept the crowd, looking for him. Ben didn't wave. He just sat quietly, one hand resting over the jacket's heart patch, the other curled in his lap. He didn't need to be seen. He just needed to be there. Ben Walker hadn't even fully settled into the back row before he felt the sting of what had just happened, not on his skin, but somewhere deeper. He'd spent decades learning how to breathe through moments like that. Combat zones had taught him how to endure chaos. Fatherhood had taught him how to endure silence, but humiliation, that had its own weight. He adjusted the sleeve of his jacket and let out a quiet breath. It wasn't about him. It never was. This was Tyler's day. That was what mattered. But fate, it seemed, wasn't quite finished testing his patience. "Excuse me again, sir." The voice came back. The younger security guard, lighter on the feet, softer in the tone, was now approaching him alone. No partner, no stiffness, just uncertainty written across his face. "I just need to double-check your credentials one more time," the guard said. "We've had a few reports." Ben looked at him steadily. "You already checked?" I know, the young man replied quickly. "It's just, some parents are saying you're making people uncomfortable." Ben arched an eyebrow. "Because I'm sitting quietly in the back." The guard hesitated, clearly regretting his orders. "It's the jacket, isn't it?" The young man didn't answer. He just looked down at his clipboard, ashamed. Ben gave a slow nod, then without a word reached into the inside pocket and pulled out a second piece of paper. Not the ticket this time, but a faded, creased letter. He handed it to the guard. The young man unfolded it. "To whom it may concern. This letter confirms that Mr. Benjamin Walker is the sole legal guardian and parent of Tyler Walker, graduating senior class of 2025. Signed, Principal Dana Wilcox." The young man read it twice. His face turned pale. I didn't know. "I'm sorry, sir." Ben took the paper back, folded it with precision, and slid it back into his jacket. Neither did the last two who told me to move. From the stage, the announcer's voice echoed. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our valedictorian, Tyler Walker." Ben's head snapped up. That wasn't supposed to happen yet. He stood. So did the woman in pearls. And then something happened that no one expected, especially not the front rows. Tyler didn't walk up to the microphone right away. He scanned the room first. He scanned until he saw that his father, his anchor, was not where he was supposed to be. Ben felt it. That hesitation, that confusion on his son's face. Tyler slowly stepped to the microphone. He unfolded a sheet of paper, stared at it, then quietly folded it again. His voice was clear, calm, unshaken. "I had something prepared," he began, "but I'm not going to read it." The audience stirred. He looked out, eyes sharp but gentle. "Today's supposed to be about accomplishments, about standing on this stage, wearing this robe, taking pictures that go on mantels and in scrapbooks." A light laugh rippled through the crowd. "But none of this," he said. "Gesturing to the stage would mean anything if not for the man sitting in the back row. He's not dressed like most of you, and he's probably not smiling right now. But he's the reason I'm here." Silence. "Ben Walker is my father, and for 18 years he's shown me what it means to sacrifice to lead and to love with no audience, no applause, and no help." The principal stiffened. Several faculty members exchanged looks. I know he's been asked to move. I know he's been made to feel unwelcome. But let me be clear, if there's one person here today who deserves a front row seat, it's him. The room fell completely still. Ben didn't move. He couldn't. Every muscle in his body was braced against the flood inside him. But his eyes, those betrayed him. They misted without permission. The young guard beside him swallowed hard. "Do you want to go back to your seat, sir?" Ben looked over at him, voice low and level. "No. I want to see what my son does next." On stage, Tyler stepped back from the microphone. He didn't bow. He didn't raise his fists. He simply nodded toward the back of the room, toward the man who had taught him strength without ever raising his voice. And then he walked back to his seat. The principal stepped up, fumbling with her notes, clearly rattled. "Well, thank you, Tyler, for those heartfelt words." But the applause wasn't for her. It wasn't even for Tyler anymore. It was for the man in the green jacket. The applause died slowly, like a ripple losing strength across a vast lake. But something had shifted in the air, intangible, but undeniable. Tyler's words still echoed off the gymnasium walls, clinging to the silence that followed. Some heads had turned. Others had stayed rigid, uncertain of how to respond. Respect was a funny thing in rooms like these, easily withheld, but slow to return even when earned. Ben remained seated in the back. He didn't move a muscle. He didn't need to. His son had just said more for him than he ever could for himself. But still, the moments after were awkward. The ceremony moved on. Names, read, caps, tilted, tassels, flipped. Teachers resumed their place on stage, handing out diplomas with mechanical grins. But the murmurs didn't stop. If anything, they only got quieter, more pointed. That's when a tap came again, this time from someone different. Mr. Walker? It wasn't security. It was a woman. Blonde, mid-40s, elegant in a sharp white suit. Her eyes were the kind you couldn't forget, frosted blue cold as glass, and just as breakable if you looked long enough. Ben recognized her instantly. Marissa Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Holdings, donor to the school, mother of the valedictorian's rival, and the kind of person who rarely made her way to the back row unless it was to inspect a loose screw. Ben gave a polite nod. "Ms. Whitmore, I think you've made your point," she said in a smooth whisper, crouching beside him so the others wouldn't hear. "But this is a formal event, and some of the guests, important guests, are finding this situation uncomfortable." Ben held her gaze. "You mean me?" She didn't blink. "I mean the distraction." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence had a weight that people like Marissa had never learned how to carry. She stood again, heels clicking lightly on the polished gym floor. "I can arrange a quieter spot for you near the side entrance," she said softer this time, "where no one will bother you." Ben gave a slow exhale, then stood. He wasn't angry. He was tired. And that was worse. He followed her down the side aisle past rows of chairs filled with people who wouldn't look at him, but who were definitely watching. The curtain of silence followed them like a shadow. Marissa gestured to a seat just behind a row of folded bleachers, half obstructed by a pillar and a giant speaker. Ben sat. From here, the stage looked like it was miles away. A few rows ahead, a mother leaned toward her teenage son and whispered, "That's the guy who used to mop floors at Miller's Hardware." "No way," the boy muttered, glancing back. "He looks like he should be in a movie or something." "He was military," the mother replied. "But now he's just, you know." Ben heard every word. He didn't flinch. Another person sat next to him, a man with silver-rimmed glasses trying not to look curious. "You his father?" he asked quietly, nodding toward the front. Ben gave a small smile. "I am." "He spoke well," the man said. "You must be proud." "I am." The man hesitated, then extended his hand. "Dan Shepard." Ben shook it. "Ben Walker." "You a Marine?" Dan asked, glancing at the jacket. Ben paused for half a breath. "SEAL." Dan blinked. "No kidding." No kidding. That was all he said. Back on stage, another student was finishing her speech. The principal returned to the podium, adjusting the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our distinguished sponsors and school donors today, including Whitmore Holdings, whose ongoing generosity supports programs like STEM Excellence and Global Scholar Exchange. Applause. Stiff. Perfunctory. Marissa Whitmore gave a graceful smile from her seat near the front. Several parents clapped more enthusiastically than necessary. Ben watched, not with bitterness, but with the distant observation of a man who'd seen far greater shows of false gratitude in far more dangerous rooms. A shadow loomed beside him. A teenager stood awkwardly with a camera. "Sir, sorry. They said I needed a few more shots from the back rows. Do you mind moving to the seat behind you?" Just for a few, Ben nodded and stood. Another step back, another row, lower, another chair half blocked by a support beam. He sat again, quietly, without complaint. From the distance, he could still see Tyler, only partially now, but enough. Enough to know his son was watching the stage, unaware of the quiet war his father was fighting, just to remain present. And yet something else stirred too. In the back left corner of the gymnasium near the emergency exit, an older man leaned slightly forward in his seat. His face was lined, his hair cropped close in that unmistakable military fade. He had seen the jacket, the patch, the walk. He leaned toward another man beside him, also older, also with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from a granite boulder. "You see him?" The other nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do." They said nothing more, but the change had begun. The applause faded, but not completely. It lingered awkward, uneven, like the sound of people unsure if they were clapping for the person on stage, or for something they couldn't quite name. The auditorium lights dimmed slightly as Principal Dana Wilcox returned to the podium. Her face was painted with the kind of smile school administrators wear when they sense a program is drifting off script. "Thank you again to our generous sponsors," she said, tapping her notes twice, as if trying to realign the ceremony. And now, the moment many of you have been waiting for. Please welcome our valedictorian, Mr. Tyler Walker. A standing ovation erupted in the front rows. Dozens stood and applauded before Tyler even moved. Parents waved. Phones rose. Camera flashes burst like miniature fireworks. But Tyler didn't move right away. He sat still, staring out toward the back. His gaze wasn't lost. It was searching. Then he stood. Slowly. With purpose. He ascended the steps to the stage, straightened his navy blue gown, and took his place behind the microphone. He looked taller somehow. Older. As if years, not hours, had passed since he was last seen in his seat. He glanced down at the sheet of paper in his hand. Folded neatly. Typed perfectly. The words he'd practiced over and over again, alone in his bedroom. Words about gratitude, ambition, the future. He placed the paper on the podium and didn't touch it again. "My name," he began, "is Tyler Walker." His voice was clear, strong. Even the parents whispering in the corner stopped. "I'm supposed to give you a speech about excellence, about what it means to be first in the class, about how we're all heading into the world with big dreams and bigger plans." A few parents nodded, waiting for the usual. But I'm not going to give that speech. Silence, like a cold wind had passed through the gym. I want to talk about the man who taught me how to fail. Gasps, subtle but real. Confusion rippled across the front rows. Tyler's classmates turned to each other, brows raised. The principal stiffened behind him. Tyler took a breath. "I grew up with one parent, a single dad. No tutors, no inheritance, no backup plan. Just a man who worked nights, weekends, and still found time to sit with me when I couldn't figure out algebra, or when I was afraid of getting picked last in gym class." He scanned the crowd. His name is Ben Walker. Ben's heart stopped. Even from the back row, he felt the weight of every eye turning toward him. And for once, no one looked away. My father, Tyler, continued, doesn't wear a suit. He's not a CEO. He doesn't have stock options or a country club membership. He wears the same jacket he wore the day he came back from war. A few in the crowd began to shift in their seats. And that jacket, it isn't old. It's earned. The silence grew heavier. I watched my dad get moved from his seat today. I watched him get asked twice if he belonged here. I watched him quietly step aside so he wouldn't cause a scene. And I know why he did it. Ben stared at his son. His jaw was clenched so tightly, he didn't realize his hands had formed fists in his lap. Because that's what good men do. They don't fight for attention. They don't demand respect. They give it. And they live in a way that commands it. Somewhere near the front, someone began to cry. Not loudly, but honestly. I'm proud to be valedictorian, Tyler said. But if I'm being honest, the person who should be standing up here today isn't me. He turned toward the back of the room. It's the man who sat in the shadows, so his son could have the spotlight. The man who taught me what courage means, what honor looks like, and what humility feels like. Tyler's voice cracked just once. The man who never asked to be seen, but who always showed up. There wasn't a sound in the room, just the distant rustle of a paper program falling to the floor. I love you, Dad, he said, voice breaking slightly. And I see you. I always have. Then, without waiting for applause, Tyler stepped back from the microphone and walked off stage. The entire room remained still. Even the principal hesitated before stepping up again. When she finally reached the podium, her voice was hoarse. Well, that was moving. Thank you, Tyler. No one clapped. No one dared to, because something sacred had just happened. Something so human, so raw, it felt wrong to follow it with bullet points and banners. In the back row, Ben didn't move, not because he was stunned, but because he couldn't. His throat was closed, his eyes blurred. His hands trembled in ways they hadn't since he carried his son out of a hospital crib 18 years ago. A woman seated in the row ahead, one who had shifted away from him earlier, turned back slowly. She didn't say a word, just looked at him. Really looked. And this time her eyes weren't judging. They were full of something else entirely. Respect. Tyler stepped down from the stage, his legs trembling more than he expected. He had spoken in front of hundreds before debates, student council, even press interviews during the statewide academic decathlon. But nothing felt like this. This wasn't a performance. This was truth, cracked open and exposed. He made his way toward his seat past rows of classmates with stunned faces, and parents too moved to pretend they weren't wiping tears. Several reached out to squeeze his shoulder. One whispered, "That was brave." Another simply mouthed, "Thank you." Tyler nodded, barely hearing them. His eyes were fixed on the back of the room, where the chair was supposed to be. But it was empty. His father, Ben, was gone. He scanned the shadows, hoping maybe his father had just stepped out to breathe. Maybe the emotion had been too much. Or maybe, like always, his dad had chosen to disappear quietly before someone asked him to. Panic rose quickly in his chest, the kind that doesn't shout but suffocates. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for the next name to be called. He just stood and walked out the side door of the auditorium. The hallway was bright compared to the dim auditorium, and cold in its silence. Tyler moved past banners, congratulating the class of 2025, past display cases with dusty sports trophies, until he reached the double doors that led outside. He pushed them open. Sunlight struck his eyes, and for a moment everything was too bright to see. Then he spotted him. There beneath a tree on the far side of the lawn, half in shadow, half in sun. Standing alone, hands in his jacket pockets, head tilted slightly toward the open auditorium window, where Tyler's voice had poured through only minutes earlier. Ben Walker hadn't left. He just couldn't go back in. Tyler walked across the lawn slowly, his graduation robe rustling in the wind tassel, swinging with each step. Ben didn't turn around. He knew who it was the moment the door opened. He could feel the rhythm of his son's steps like a heartbeat he'd memorized long ago. "You disappeared," Tyler said softly when he reached him. Ben didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "Didn't want to take anything away from you." Tyler blinked. "You didn't." Ben looked down. People were staring. "Let them." Ben gave a dry smile. "They don't understand. They don't need to." Silence stretched between them like an invisible rope, tense, taut, full of years unspoken. Tyler finally said, "You heard the speech." Ben nodded once. "Was it too much?" Ben looked at his son then. Really looked. Not as a boy who once needed protecting, but as a man who had chosen truth over comfort, and dignity over applause. "No," he said, voice low. "It was just enough." Tyler reached into his robe pocket and pulled out the official diploma case. "I was supposed to wait. Photos, parents on stage, all that. But I don't care about any of that." He handed the folder to his father. Ben hesitated, then took it. His hand trembled slightly as he opened it. There, inside the velvet lining, was the parchment. Tyler Benjamin Walker, class of 2025, valedictorian. Ben's eyes paused on the middle name. He didn't speak. Tyler saw it. The way his father's throat moved. The way he blinked too fast and looked away toward the parking lot, like he needed somewhere safe to put the emotion. "I used to think Tyler said that you were just some guy doing his best. A janitor with a tough past. A Marine with too many stories you never told." He paused. "But I know now. That jacket. That silence. That's not weakness. That's strength. I still don't fully understand." Ben closed the diploma and handed it back. "No," he said. "That diploma. That strength. They stood like that a while. No more words. No need for them. Until a new sound reached their ears. Applause. Coming not from the auditorium but from the other side of the building. A second wave. Stronger. Growing." Ben and Tyler looked at each other. "What is that?" Tyler asked. Ben narrowed his eyes. "I don't know," he said. But deep down, something in his bones shifted. An instinct he hadn't felt in years. The kind that once whispered just before ambushes. The kind that told him a change was coming, quiet, deliberate, and unstoppable. And it was heading straight for them. Inside the gymnasium, the ceremony pressed on. Names were called. Diplomas were handed over. But the atmosphere had shifted. The comfortable buzz of celebration had cooled into something quieter, like the entire room had collectively taken a breath and hadn't yet let it out. People kept glancing toward the back rows, toward the now empty chair where Ben Walker had once sat, toward the echo of Tyler Walker's words, still hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. In the middle of row H, near the far left side of the bleachers, sat a man who hadn't moved since the valedictorian's speech. He looked to be in his late 60s, stocky with a square jaw and shoulders that had once carried more than just weight. His name was Walt Greer. He wore a modest gray jacket, jeans, and a pair of weathered brown boots. Nothing about him suggested anything remarkable, except perhaps the military-precise way he held himself, even while seated. Next to him sat his granddaughter, who was too busy texting to notice that her grandfather was no longer watching the stage. He was staring toward the side exit, the same door Ben and Tyler had disappeared through moments earlier. Walt leaned slightly toward the man beside him, a tall gentleman in a blazer with a silver star pin on his lapel, another quiet observer. "You recognize him?" Walt asked, voice low. The man adjusted his glasses. "Who?" "The guy in the green jacket." There was a pause. Then, "Should I?" Walt nodded slowly. "Ben Walker." "SEAL Team 11. Commander," The other man's eyes widened. The commander, B. Walker. "I served under him once," briefly Walt said. "Only for a joint op in Kandahar, but nobody forgot that mission." "You sure it's him?" Walt's face turned solemn. "You don't forget a man who drags your entire unit out under sniper fire with a dislocated shoulder, and doesn't tell anyone about it until you're halfway to evac." The man exhaled slowly. "My God." Walt nodded. "I thought he was dead. Why would a guy like that end up here?" Alone, Walt's voice dropped to a whisper, one that carried more weight than thunder. "Because heroes like him don't need parades. They just need to see their kid walk across a stage." The whisper didn't stay between the two men for long. A woman 2 rows ahead overheard it. She whispered it to her husband, who turned and whispered it to the family behind them. Like a fuse on dry tinder, the story spread not with noise, but with reverence. Ben Walker, SEAL Team 11, decorated commander. The man who had been quietly removed from the front rows. The man they'd asked to step aside. The man Tyler Walker had called his greatest teacher. It spread across the gymnasium like a sacred secret. One people wished they'd known 5 minutes earlier, and yet somehow they felt it wasn't too late to listen now. Out on the lawn, Tyler was still holding the diploma when the double doors behind them creaked open. A school administrator stepped out, looking around nervously. "Mr. Walker." Ben turned. The man straightened his tie. "Sir, the, principal would like to invite you back in. She says there's a special seat up front, right next to the stage." Ben raised an eyebrow. After the ceremony's nearly over, the man stammered, "Well, we'd just like to make things right." Ben glanced at Tyler. Tyler gave him a small shrug. "Your call, Dad." Ben turned back to the administrator. "I'm fine right here." The man hesitated, then nodded quickly, and retreated back inside, red-faced. Back inside the gymnasium, more eyes now turned toward the entrance. The whisper had become a wave. Marissa Whitmore, sitting in the front row, noticed it too. The polite smile she wore like armor was faltering. She turned slightly toward a member of the school board beside her. "What's happening?" she whispered. The man leaned in. "Word is, that man your assistant had removed. He's a decorated SEAL commander." Marissa's expression didn't change, but her posture did. Her back stiffened. Her fingers tightened slightly around her designer clutch. The board member added almost guiltily, "Apparently, he saved an entire unit once, and never spoke of it again." Marissa didn't answer. She was no longer sure where to file Ben Walker in her mental categories of threat, inconvenience, or insignificance, because suddenly he didn't seem to fit any of them. In the back of the gym, Walt Greer stood. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just quietly. He straightened his jacket and placed his veteran's cap, navy blue gold letters, on his head. Then slowly he began to make his way toward the side exit, not out of boredom, not because the ceremony was over, but because something had shifted, and something else, something bigger was coming. The sound came first, not loud, not rushed. Just 6 pairs of footsteps, measured, deliberate, synchronized, like they'd done it before. The back doors of the Waverly High Gymnasium opened without announcement. No trumpets, no booming voice. Just 6 men in dark suits, stepping in one after another, as if responding to an unspoken order only they could hear. Their presence didn't command attention immediately. Not in a room where people were still whispering about valedictorian speeches and SEAL commanders. But those closest to the doors turned first, then the ones in the next row, then the next. And soon the entire auditorium began to feel it. That shift, as if the room had tilted on its axis. They didn't look like military men at first glance. No medals, no name tags, no uniforms. But something about the way they moved, shoulders squared, spacing exact, no wasted motion, spoke a language older than ceremony. These were men who had learned how to move together, in chaos, in silence, in fire. Each one had their own weight, their own scars. One walked with a slight limp but didn't favor it. Another had a long, faint scar cutting through his cheekbone. The tallest of them wore dark glasses and a faint line of white hair at his temples. But they didn't speak. Not to the ushers, not to the principal, not even to each other. They walked in formation straight up the center aisle past the confused guests and stunned students. Some parents instinctively moved aside, others just froze. Tyler and Ben, still outside, hadn't yet seen them. They stood under the shade of the tall oak tree, where dappled light touched the grass, and the wind carried faint echoes of shifting chairs and murmuring voices. "I think you caused a bit of a stir," Ben said, finally breaking the silence between them with a faint smile. Tyler gave a short laugh. "Yeah. Wasn't planning to. That's usually how the real stuff happens." They stood like that for another moment, before Tyler glanced toward the building. You hear that Ben turned his head slightly. The noise was changing, like chairs being scooted, like people rising. Applause. No, it wasn't that. It was attention, shifting, focused. Ben's body stiffened, but not from fear. It was instinct, the kind that had once warned him to duck seconds before a bullet shattered the wall behind him. He looked toward the building, and then he saw them. The door opened, and 6 men walked out. Straight lines, black suits, no hesitation. Ben didn't move, neither did Tyler, because both of them knew these weren't strangers. The 6 men stopped 10 paces from Ben. The tall one with the white streaked hair stepped forward first. He didn't smile, didn't speak right away. He reached into his jacket pocket slowly, as if handling something sacred. And then he pulled it out. A small, square patch of fabric, frayed at the edges, olive drab green, the kind sewn into the chest of military uniforms. On it were 4 words, hand-stitched in faded black thread. Levin, Commander B. Walker. He held it with both hands like an offering. Ben stared at it for a moment. Then his voice, quiet but unwavering, spoke. "You kept it." The man nodded. "You earned it." Tyler looked between them, heart-hammering. "You know these guys?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Ben's voice was low. "I carried them. They carried me." No further explanation was needed. Because when warriors show up uninvited, unannounced, and unarmed, but in formation, the world understands. This wasn't for spectacle. This was for honor. Back inside the gym, Principal Wilcox stepped up to the mic, again clearly shaken. "I believe we've just had some very special guests arrive," she stammered. "Please, remain seated." But most didn't. They were already standing, one by one, row by row, not in panic, not even in surprise, but in recognition. Because sometimes dignity enters through the back door. Quietly, without asking for permission, Marissa Whitmore sat frozen in her chair, watching through the wide side windows as the 6 men surrounded Ben in a perfect arc. She clutched her designer purse tighter, her face composed, but her throat tight with something unfamiliar. Regret, respect. She wasn't sure yet. Back on the lawn, the man with the patch stepped closer. He handed it to Tyler. Tyler took it carefully, holding it like it might break if he gripped too hard. "What is this?" The man smiled, just barely. "Proof." Then he turned to Ben again. "You ready, sir?" Ben exhaled slowly. "I've been ready." The man nodded. Then the 6 stepped back, and like a silent wall, they began to walk in formation with Ben back toward the gym. No announcement, no permission, just presence. Tyler followed, clutching the patch. The doors opened again, and this time, no one dared stand in their way. The gym doors swung open again, not with force, not with sound, but with presence. a presence no one could ignore. Ben Walker entered not alone, but flanked on both sides by 6 men moving like shadows, with discipline baked into their bones. The hum of conversation that had simmered inside the auditorium evaporated into complete silence. Every eye followed them. No one asked who they were. By now, everyone knew. Ben didn't walk with pride. He walked with weight, the kind that came from years of silence, of stepping back so others could shine. The kind carried by a man who had learned the cost of being seen and the price of being ignored. But now, the world had seen, and it could no longer pretend it hadn't. The procession moved steadily down the center aisle. One of the seals carried a folded green cloth in his hand, faded, wrinkled, but handled like it held something sacred. It did. As they reached the middle of the auditorium, an elderly usher stepped aside instinctively, his hand trembling over his chest. Tyler walked just behind the formation, still holding the smaller patch he'd been given earlier, the one that bore his father's name. He looked at it now, like it was a fragment of something bigger, a legacy folded in cloth and silence. The principal stood frozen at the podium. Her script lay forgotten. Her hands clutched the wooden edges like they might steady her against the rising tide of emotion building in the room. She opened her mouth to speak, but the man with the green cloth was already moving. He stepped out of formation, crossed the floor, and walked straight to the table where the school's ceremonial items had been neatly laid: academic awards, scholarship plaques, honor cords. He set the cloth down, carefully unfolded it. A pin, a trident, a name. Seal 11, Commander B. Walker. Honor is earned. The words weren't just stitched into the cloth, they were etched into time. The cloth lay between the school's symbols of achievement, like a silent protest and a powerful correction. For a moment, no one knew what to do, until the MC, an assistant principal who had once told Ben he couldn't park near the staff lot, stepped forward, leaned into the mic, and said the only words that made sense. Would Commander Benjamin Walker please come to the stage? No one moved. Then someone in the audience stood. Then another. And another. By the time Ben reached the steps leading to the stage, everyone was on their feet. It wasn't applause. Not yet. It was reverence. The kind reserved for a different kind of hero. Not the ones in movies, but the ones who came home, raised children alone, and showed up quietly for graduation, wearing a jacket with their past still stitched into the fabric. Marissa Whitmore remained seated in the front row, frozen, no longer the most important person in the room, and for the first time in her adult life, she knew it. The veneer of power didn't feel like armor now. It felt like a mask, one that had cracked the moment Ben entered the gym and the crowd parted like water. She looked at Tyler, then at the man walking past her without a glance, and for reasons she couldn't explain, her hand trembled. Ben stepped onto the stage. No podium, no speech written, no introduction necessary. He looked out over the sea of students, parents, teachers, and strangers who were no longer whispering but watching, really watching. And then he did something no one expected. He didn't speak, he didn't bow, he turned, faced the 6 men behind him, and saluted. One by one, the SEALs returned the gesture, not with flair, not with dramatics, but with the kind of stillness that only comes from years of brotherhood forged in silence. Then the applause began, not wild, not chaotic, but building, steady, like the sound of justice arriving late but exactly when it was needed. Tyler stood off to the side, his eyes glistening. He'd spent years thinking he'd understood his father. Now he realized he'd only known the outline. This was the depth, the fabric of the man, the weight of the name he bore. Ben turned toward the principal, who now stepped aside without needing to be asked. There was nothing left for her to moderate. He picked up the patch the SEAL had laid down and pressed it gently to his chest, over the same place his jacket carried its old outline. Then he looked out again. At the crowd, at the people who had once whispered, at the people now standing. And for the first time in years, he let himself be seen. The applause faded, but no one sat. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was sacred. A stillness carved out of awe and maybe a touch of guilt. Everyone in that auditorium felt it. Something had shifted, something irreversible. A man they dismissed had become the center of the room. The principal stood off to the side, now uncertain of her place. Her script, so carefully prepared, sat useless on the podium. This was no longer her stage. It belonged to the man in the green jacket. And yet, he hadn't spoken. Ben Walker stood still, not seeking the mic, not basking, just standing as he always had, strong, quiet, present. It was the assistant principal who finally stepped forward, voice shaking slightly as he leaned toward the microphone. "Mr. Walker." "Commander Walker," he swallowed. "Would you be willing to say a few words?" The room held its breath. Ben didn't answer right away. He glanced behind him at the 6 men standing at attention, at his son Tyler just off stage, his eyes red but steady. Then Ben stepped forward. No notes, no script, no title. Just a man in a frayed military jacket. And more dignity than the entire room had worn when he walked in. He stood at the microphone for a beat too long, and just when people began to wonder if he would speak at all, his voice, low, gravelly, steady, broke the silence. "I wasn't supposed to be up here," he began. A few people chuckled nervously. He continued, "And if today had gone the way I planned, I would have stayed in the back, watched my son walk across this stage and gone home with a proud heart and a few blurry photos." His eyes scanned the crowd, not accusing, not demanding, but remembering. But sometimes life makes other plans. He took a slow breath. "I'm not here to give advice. I've spent the last 18 years learning how to listen more than speak, especially when it comes to my son, Tyler." Ben turned, slightly looking over at him. "He stood up here and told you what kind of man I am. That means the world to me. But I need you to know something about him." Tyler's jaw tightened, his chin trembling. Ben continued, "He's the kind of man who never needed me to be rich, never needed me to be famous. He just needed me to show up. And that, I could do." The room was completely still. "I've made mistakes," Ben said. "I've been angry. I've been tired. I've worked jobs most people wouldn't take. I've cleaned floors in buildings where people looked me in the eye and still couldn't see me." His gaze swept across the audience, not as condemnation, but as memory. And that's okay, because my job wasn't to be seen. It was to see him. He pointed gently at his son, to raise a man with a compass stronger than applause. A man who doesn't confuse noise with worth. A man who, when he saw his father pushed aside, stood up without waiting for permission. Someone sniffled in the crowd. Others wiped their eyes. And as for this, Ben reached into his jacket and pulled out the old patch Tyler had handed him earlier, holding it between 2 fingers. "Seal 11, Commander B. Walker. That name doesn't make me special." He paused. "What makes it special is that 6 men walked in here today, not to prove something for me, but to remind me who I was. Because for a long time, I forgot." Ben looked down just for a moment, collecting himself. "I spent years trying to disappear into a life that was quiet, stable, safe for my boy. I didn't think anyone needed to know where I came from, and I sure didn't think anyone would care." He smiled faintly. "But maybe they do." His voice softened. "And maybe some truths are worth standing for." He looked at the principal, then at the front row, then at the families who had once whispered now, watching in stunned reverence. I'm not here to ask for a seat. He tapped the patch gently against his chest. I already had one. The crowd didn't cheer. They stood. For a full beat, the entire auditorium simply stood. Some cried openly. Others nodded quietly, reverently. The kind of response usually reserved for folded flags and final salutes. But this wasn't a funeral. It was a homecoming, a recognition long overdue. In the front row, Marissa Whitmore felt her heart ache, not from shame, not quite, but from something deeper. A recognition that she had misjudged a man who hadn't asked for anything except a place to sit and watch his son. She rose, not all at once, but slowly. And then she clapped 3 times, deliberate. Others followed. And then the room erupted not in wild cheers, but in measured echoing applause, the kind that shakes you not from the volume, but from the meaning behind every hand that strikes. Ben stepped back. He gave no bow. He didn't need to. He turned and walked back toward his son. Tyler met him at the steps, his voice barely a whisper. That was... Ben placed a hand on his shoulder. I know. The ceremony had officially ended, but no one rushed to leave. People lingered, caught between awe and humility. They moved slowly through the aisles, speaking in lowered voices, as if they were walking through a memorial rather than a gymnasium. Some shook Ben's hand. Others simply nodded, unable to find words. But Ben wasn't looking for their approval. His eyes followed only one person. Tyler, the boy who was no longer a boy. Outside, the golden afternoon light had begun to soften into a warmer hue, the kind that wraps around you like memory. Ben and Tyler stood near the oak tree again, away from the noise, the cameras, the distant hum of reunion chatter. Neither of them spoke right away, until Tyler broke the silence. You never told me. Ben looked at him, brows raised slightly. Told you what? Tyler held up the patch still clutched in his hand. Any of this. Who you were. What you did. I had to learn about it from strangers today. Ben didn't flinch. He took a breath, long and steady. I didn't hide it because I was ashamed, he said. I hid it because I didn't want it to define you. Tyler frowned, confused. Ben continued. There's a thing that happens especially in military families. Kids grow up in the shadow of their father's medals, their stories, their rank. And some of them chase it like it's the only way to prove they're worthy. Others run from it like it's a weight they can't carry. He paused. I didn't want either for you. Tyler looked down at the patch, his voice quiet. So you just erased yourself? Ben gave a soft, almost sad smile. I didn't erase myself. I just folded that chapter away. Like an old flag. He looked out toward the horizon, eyes narrowing just slightly. I've seen a lot, son. Things I never wanted you to imagine. Places where kindness went to die. I led men into hell and watched them come back. Changed. Or not at all. His voice thinned, but his eyes never wavered. I carried bodies. I wrote letters to mothers. I stood over dog tags and prayed I'd never be the next name in someone's folded envelope. Tyler swallowed hard, his throat tight. And then one day, Ben continued, You were born. And everything changed. His voice cracked just barely. You were 8 pounds red-faced and screaming like you'd already seen the world. Your mom, she didn't make it past delivery. Ben blinked fast once. I held you in one arm, and her wedding ring in the other, and I remember thinking, This is the mission now. Tyler stepped closer. His voice was barely a whisper. You never told me that. Ben gave a single nod. I didn't think you needed to carry that either. They stood in silence for a moment. Wind rustled through the trees above. Somewhere in the background, a car horn honked, breaking the stillness, but only for a second. Then Tyler said something that Ben hadn't expected. But I do. Ben turned. I do need to carry it. Not because it's a burden, but because it's ours. I spent years thinking you were just a quiet man who did what he had to do. Now I see you chose silence. For me." Tyler looked him dead in the eye. "And I'm old enough now to choose differently. To listen." Ben's jaw tightened. Emotion gathered in the corners of his eyes. "You sure Tyler didn't hesitate?" "Yeah. Because I want to know the whole you. Not just the dad who showed up to soccer games. Not just the guy who worked night shifts. I want to know the man who built this life from scratch. Who loved enough to go invisible." Ben looked at his son with a pride that had no words left. "You don't owe me that," he said. Tyler shook his head. "Maybe not. But you earned it." He reached into his robe pocket and pulled out the small pin Principal Wilcox had handed him earlier, valedictorian, class of 2025. He pressed it into his father's hand. Ben looked down at the tiny golden pin, his brow furrowed. "What's this?" Tyler smiled. "It's yours." Ben laughed soft and rough. "You earned that, not me," Tyler replied. "I earned it. Because of you." They stood in stillness for a moment more. Then Ben pulled him into a tight, one-armed hug, the kind he hadn't given since Tyler was 12, and too old for kisses on the forehead. And for a long while, neither said anything. Because sometimes, the best things a father and son can say don't require words at all. From a distance, the 6 SEALs watched. They didn't intrude. They didn't salute. They simply stood in quiet formation, bearing witness. Walt Greer, still leaning against his cane under the flagpole nearby, nodded slowly. "That boy's gonna change the world," he muttered. One of the SEALs glanced at him. He already did. The crowd had thinned. Folding chairs were half stacked. Banners rustled gently in the breeze. A janitor began rolling a trash can toward the gymnasium doors, whistling a slow tune that echoed against the high walls of the quieting campus. But one woman still sat in the front row, alone. Perfect posture. Legs crossed. Her white suit immaculate, even as the event unraveled around her. In her lap she clutched a leather-bound notebook with initials engraved in gold foil, M.W. Marissa Whitmore, CEO, school benefactor, and for most of her life, the most influential person in any room, now found herself still seated. Because standing, suddenly, felt like something you had to earn. She watched as Ben Walker stepped off the stage and embraced his son. Watched the 6 SEALs disperse quietly with that effortless grace that comes only from men who've survived what others can't imagine. Watched the crowd linger around him like moths, drawn not to light, but to truth. And she had never felt more out of place in her own event. Finally, slowly, she stood. Not to speak, but to walk. Step by step, her heels clicking softly on the polished gym floor. Ben was standing alone now, his jacket still zipped halfway up the patch, tucked into his chest like a shield. He looked up when she approached, not with defensiveness, not with pride, but with the still even gaze of someone who had seen far worse, and had no reason to flinch now. "Ben," she said. He nodded once. "Marissa." She swallowed. The name sounded heavier than she expected coming out of his mouth. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, she admitted. He waited. But I realized, that's exactly what I've always done, isn't it? Not say anything. Not when it matters. Ben tilted his head slightly. "You usually let the room speak for you." A faint, humorless smile tugged at her mouth. "Yes. But today, the room had other plans." She paused, then took a breath. "I owe you an apology." Ben didn't answer, so she continued. Not just for what happened today, though, that was unacceptable, but for before that. Years of it. You worked quietly, hard, kept your head down. I saw you, but I didn't see you. Not really. Ben's eyes softened just a fraction. You saw what you wanted to see. She nodded, and ignored the rest. Her voice grew quieter. When your name came up for the donor recognition program, someone asked if we should include you on the veterans panel. I dismissed it, said you wouldn't want the spotlight, that you didn't have the kind of record that made for inspirational stories. Ben raised an eyebrow. You said that I did, she admitted, even though you didn't know anything about my record. She shook her head. I didn't ask. Ben looked at her for a long time, then said without anger, "That's the difference between people who build their reputation and people who carry it in silence." Marissa's throat tightened. She stepped closer. "I judged you by your boots, your jacket, your silence. I didn't see the man who carried a nation's scars in the fibers of that fabric." She reached into her notebook, opened it, and pulled out a folded piece of embossed stationery. She extended it to him. He took it with hesitation. Inside was a formal letter, signed and sealed with a new school policy, Veterans in Service Scholarship Fund, established in the name of Commander Benjamin Walker. Ben looked up, startled. "I don't want recognition," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's what makes it necessary." She exhaled deeply, her voice dropping. "There's something else I need to say." Ben waited. "I remember you," she said quietly. "From before. You probably don't remember me, but I remember you. My brother was in your unit." Ben blinked. "Private Daniel Whitmore, Afghanistan, 12 years ago." Ben's face changed. Just a flicker. A moment. He remembered. Marissa continued, her voice shaking now. "You carried him out. Bullet in your leg. I have the report. You didn't just save him, you shielded him. You didn't know he had a sister watching him ship out who'd never stopped checking her phone for updates." Ben stared at her. "I do remember him," he said at last. "He wrote home about you," she whispered. "Said there was a man in his unit who didn't talk much, but when he did, it made everything quieter." She looked away, blinking rapidly. "I've spent so much of my life trying to be the loudest person in the room, and it took me far too long to understand that real authority doesn't make noise." Ben folded the letter slowly, slipped it into his jacket. Then he extended his hand. Marissa looked at it and took it. She shook it like someone finally releasing something they'd been carrying too long. And then she said, in the softest voice she'd spoken all day, "Thank you for what you gave, for what you still give." Ben nodded. "For what we all gave." From behind them, Tyler stood watching. He didn't interrupt, just observed. Because some moments between adults are sacred in a different way. As Marissa turned to leave, she passed by him, paused, and said with a rare softness, "You have a remarkable father." Tyler looked at her. "I know." The sun had dipped lower now, casting long, amber shadows across the lawn of Waverly High. Most of the crowd had dispersed, parents gathering balloons, students posing for photos, with grandparents, laughter drifting through the air like floating seeds. But not everyone had left. Near the base of the flagpole, 6 men still stood. Still. Silent. Unmoving. They had remained there since the ceremony's end, watching, not guarding, not waiting, but witnessing. The crowd hadn't approached them. No one had dared. Their presence, without a single word, had rendered every camera flash and every handshake irrelevant. They weren't celebrities. They were reminders of something deeper than medals or uniforms, of sacrifice that never demanded applause. Ben and Tyler stepped out from under the tree, their quiet moment with Marissa now behind them. Father and son walked shoulder to shoulder, not in step, but in rhythm. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. A few heads turned as they passed the school board members now gathered under the banner by the gym, watched them like men, watching the tide come in after pretending it would never rise. Some of the seniors Tyler's classmates had stayed too, Not because they were told to, but because something had happened here today that they knew they wouldn't fully understand until they were much older. A lesson had been taught, without a chalkboard, without a textbook, just by a man in a green jacket who never asked to speak. As Ben and Tyler approached the flagpole, the 6 men adjusted slightly. No orders given, no words exchanged, just a shift in weight, a silent signal, a tightening of posture. Ben stopped. So did Tyler. The leader of the 6 tall, white streaks in his hair posture, like a mountain, stepped forward. He looked at Ben, then nodded once, and turned to face the rest. No one told them what to do next, but they all knew. In perfect unison, the 6 men took one step forward, brought their heels together, and saluted. Not a casual gesture, not the half-hearted snap of a recruit. This was a salute meant to last, to honor something that had gone too long unacknowledged, to say, "We see you. We never forgot." Ben didn't move. His eyes flicked from one face to the next. Each man had once followed him into places maps didn't cover, had trusted him in the dark, had survived because of him, and now they stood here, clean suits, weathered hands, eyes that had seen war, and offered the only tribute that mattered in their world. A silent salute. No music played. No announcer spoke. But from the other side of the field, someone began clapping. Once, twice. Then others joined. Not roaring applause, just steady rising full of reverence. It wasn't for the speech. It wasn't for the school. It wasn't even for the flag fluttering behind the seals. It was for Ben Walker. For the man who had been told he didn't belong. For the man who chose silence so his son could have peace. For the man who gave everything and asked for nothing. Tyler stood next to his father, the patch still tucked into his pocket, his eyes glassy but proud. "I've never seen anything like this," he whispered. Ben finally spoke. "Neither have I." One by one, the SEALs lowered their salutes. Not all at once, each man held it for a breath longer, as if letting go of a final thread. Then, without turning their backs, they stepped back into formation and stood down. They didn't break ranks. They simply stood behind Ben again like they always had. Even now, when the battlefield was replaced by a high school lawn, and the only enemy was indifference. Principal Wilcox stepped forward from the gym steps, her hands folded tightly. She approached Ben slowly. "I don't have the words," she said. Ben offered a soft, tired smile. "Then don't try." She looked at him, really looked, and gave a slow nod. Then she turned to the remaining students nearby. "This will be written into our school history," she said softly. "Every graduation from this day forward will begin with one seat left open." Ben raised an eyebrow. For who, he asked. Wilcox answered without hesitation. "For anyone who gave more than we could see." As the sun dipped behind the trees, Tyler turned toward his father. "Let's go home." Ben nodded, but before they left, he turned one last time toward the 6 men. He didn't salute. He didn't need to. He just nodded. And they nodded back. That was enough. They walked back to the truck together, father and son. No medals pinned to their chest, no fanfare following behind. Just the sound of footsteps on grass, a patch in a pocket, and a story neither would forget. And as they drove away, no one moved to fill the space they left, because sometimes a man walks out of a place, and the space remains sacred long after. 1 year later, Waverly High School's graduation looked much the same. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the freshly cut lawn. A wide banner hung between 2 oaks that read, "Congratulations, Class of 2026. The jazz band stumbled through the familiar chords of pomp and circumstance, and proud parents leaned over rows to take blurry photos of caps, barely taller than the crowd. But this year, something was different. At the front row, just left of center, was a single chair. It was empty. There was no name card, no balloon tied to the back, just a worn olive green jacket draped over it. Folded neatly, not staged. Remembered. The seat had been left open by school policy now at every major ceremony since the day Ben Walker had stepped onto the stage, flanked by 6 silent shadows. People didn't always know what the seat meant. New parents asked, "Is someone running late?" Was there a mistake with the assignments? But someone always answered, "No, that seat's not for a person. It's for a presence." And then they would nod and lower their voices as if entering a sacred space. Sometimes a student would pause near it, just for a moment, to reflect, to remember that greatness doesn't always speak loudly or wear a suit. It might wear boots, or a jacket with a patch no one ever asked about, or the silence of someone who gave more than they were ever recognized for. Backstage, Principal Wilcox reviewed her notes with quiet care. She'd changed over the last year. Her voice was softer now, her posture more human. She had started a mentorship program for students whose parents served. The scholarship in Ben Walker's name had already helped 3 veterans return to school. She straightened her collar, took a breath, and walked toward the podium. When the time came, she paused longer than usual before the final announcement. "There's one more tradition," she said, "one that began only last year. We honor all who attend today, but we also honor someone who once stood at the back of this crowd, not to be seen, but to see. Not to speak, but to support." She gestured to the chair. "This seat remains empty. Not because someone is missing, but because someone already gave." A hush spread again, just like the year before, and somewhere in the crowd on the far edge near the parking lot, Ben Walker stood. Not at the front, not in uniform, just in a clean button-up shirt and slacks that still didn't quite fit right on his frame. His jacket, the one with the seal patch he had left folded on that chair this morning at dawn before anyone arrived. Next to him stood Tyler, taller now, cleaner lines in his jaw, a sophomore at State with a double major in political science and history. But more than that, a young man with clarity in his eyes. He'd started mentoring younger students, joined the Veterans Resource Group, and every Sunday, he still came home. He looked at his father now and smiled. "You left it again," he said, nodding toward the stage. Ben shrugged. "Didn't fit me anymore." Tyler chuckled. "Dad, it's not supposed to fit. It's supposed to mean." Ben didn't answer, but the faint grin betrayed him as the last name was called and the caps flew into the sky like dandelions scattered by wind. The crowd erupted in cheers. Families rushed the lawn, laughter rising in spirals. But before the chaos reached the front row, a girl no more than 8 walked away from her mother's hand. She approached the empty chair with hesitant steps. She reached out, small fingers brushing the edge of the jacket. Her mother called gently, "Sweetheart, don't touch that." But a nearby teacher smiled. "It's okay. Let her." The girl looked back at them, then up at the sky, and she sat, right in the empty chair. She didn't put on the jacket. She didn't speak. She just sat there with her hands folded in her lap like she belonged. And somehow, she did. Back by the tree, Ben saw her. He didn't move, but his eyes softened, his shoulders relaxed. And in that moment, he knew this was what legacy looked like. Not applause, not medals, just a young girl sitting in a chair that once held silence and making it her own. Tyler broke the stillness. "So, what now?" Ben considered it. "We go home," and then Ben smiled. "Then we get ready. Life doesn't wait." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "You thinking of finally applying for that VA speaking program?" Ben chuckled. "Maybe." "You'd be good." Ben shrugged. Only if I get to wear the jacket. You mean the jacket? Ben looked at the chair again, now surrounded by curious classmates. No, he said. That one belongs to the school now. He reached into his bag, pulled out another. A little less worn, a little less frayed, but with the same patch on the inside. Tyler blinked. You had a spare. Ben grinned. Every SEAL knows you never go in with just one way out. They walked side by side back to the truck. No crowd followed them. No cameras flashed. Just two men, a father and a son, carrying with them something no ceremony could ever bestow. A life that mattered. And a truth the world had finally learned to see. Honor is not granted by titles or seats, but by presence, love, and the willingness to remain unseen until the moment matters most. Where are you watching from today? We'd love to hear your story, your thoughts, or even just a few kind words in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel. It helps us keep sharing these moments of quiet strength, healing, and human connection. Thank you for spending time with us. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other.